We're looking today at the miracle, one of the miracles of Jesus. The dying girl and sick woman appears in a couple of the Gospels. And it's quite an intriguing miracle, this, because the two healings run together in a unique way. And I think as you look at this, we need to look at it as these two miracles working together to teach us something vital about Jesus' mission. Jesus' mission. That's the story. Jesus has just come from the other side of the Sea of Galilee after dealing with a man who was possessed by many demons, and Jesus commanded these demons to go into the pigs, and these pigs rushed into the lake and drowned, and Jesus was driven out of that area, and so he crosses the lake and comes back into an area where he's known, near Capernaum. And so as he's gathering on the shore again amongst people who have heard him before, people start to gather around him, and Jesus is interrupted by Jairus, the synagogue leader, an important man in the community, a man who's got a certain amount of authority amongst the people. And this man goes down on his knees to Jesus and begs him to come and heal his daughter, who he says is dying. And Jesus immediately starts to follow him. And as he's following him, he's approached from behind and out of sight by a woman who's got constant bleeding, we're told. So we presume that she's struggling with menstrual problems. And she is so different from Jairus that she doesn't feel enabled to go up and approach Jesus specifically, personally, because society says she's unclean. And so she's got this belief that if she just touches Jesus' cloak, his healing power would heal her. And she wanders up through the crowd, not trying to cause any difficulties or problems, and reaches out, touches his cloak, and she immediately knows that she's been healed of this problem, this medical problem she's had for years. But Jesus realises his power's been drained out of him. He knows that he's healed somebody, although he can't see her. And so, on the way to heal Jairus' daughter, he's stopped in his tracks by this woman with this problem. Two contrasting individuals, poles apart on the social scale, both needing Jesus' immediate attention. This poor woman, we learn, has been suffering from this menstrual problem for 12 years. And she's seen a lot of doctors and healers and spent a lot of money. And she's still suffering from this problem. And you can imagine somebody going through that, what that would cause her physical condition to be like, suffering definitely from anemia, exhaustion. But of course it had in Jewish society amazing consequences, because under the Jewish regulations she was deemed unclean. And if we go to these regulations, this is what we're talking about. This comes in the story of Leviticus. This is the great teaching manual that the Jewish people believes. They believe these laws were given to them from Moses, from God himself, for the way they need to live as God's people. And chapter 15:19 says this: whenever a woman has her menstrual period, she will be ceremonially unclean for 7 days. Anyone who touches her during that time will be unclean until evening. Anything on which the woman lies or sits during the time of her period will be unclean. If any of you touch her bed, you must wash your clothes and bathe yourself in water, and you will remain unclean until evening. If you touch any object she has sat on, you must wash your clothes and bathe yourself in water, and you will remain unclean until evening. This includes her bed or any other object she has sat on. You will be unclean till the evening if you touch it. If a woman has a flow of blood for many days that is unrelated to a menstrual period, or if the blood continues beyond normal period, she is ceremonially unclean as during her menstrual period. The woman will be unclean as long as the discharge continues. Well, where does that put this woman in Jewish society? Well, it puts her completely as an outcast, unable to worship God, unable to move about the community, virtually a prisoner in her own home. If she had been married, her husband wouldn't need to be anywhere near her. And anybody that was assisting her with a medical condition would automatically make themselves unclean for the rest of the day. It's an absolutely appalling place for this woman to be, and sounds, from our perspective in the 21st century, unbelievable that people should look upon a female with this condition in such a terrible manner. Well, I suppose I'm not going to go into the longs and shorts of all this, but obviously this law was made in the beginning for specific health reasons. We know today, they didn't know today, that, you can catch some awful things from other people's blood, can't we? You can't go near a doctor now without him touching you with rubber gloves on. No ambulance or police officer would dare to touch somebody physically without gloves these days. And why? Because there is risks involved. But of course the people of Jesus' time didn't know that. They were totally unaware of that sort of thing. They only sought to obey the law. But that puts this woman at a tremendous disadvantage. But that didn't stop Jesus healing her. It didn't stop Jesus talking to her. He was a person who came into our lives specifically to change these harsh attitudes that God's people had grown into through years of being mistaught. But she's interrupted Jesus' journey to see Jairus' daughter. How do you think he might have felt that His daughter's in a critical condition. He's got Jesus, the healer's attention. He's on his way. And all of a sudden it's stopped for a woman who's unclean. I'm sure that he wasn't very happy about that at all. After all, he was an important person in the area. He was a person who had authority and commanded people to do things for him. And yet, all that stops because of a woman whose name we don't even know, who's afraid to come out of the shadows in that situation. What a place to be in. As a leader of the synagogue, he was well respected, expected to be listened to. When he spoke, people stopped and took notice. He must have been pleased that Jesus was taking heed of his words and coming to his house. Well, what was Jesus doing? Going with this man. Jairus was part of the establishment, part of the group of Jewish leaders who were trying to put down Jesus, trying, many of them, to kill him. I mean, why was Jesus consulting with the enemy? That group of the Jewish people who didn't welcome him into their towns normally, or into their houses, or sit down and listen to his teaching with an open mind, because they were against him. Well, there can only be one reason, I suppose, is that Jairus was desperate because he loved his daughter. And he was prepared to do anything, never mind the social scales of his inner circle, never mind what his boss would say about consulting with this so-called Messiah. Quite interesting, isn't it? That Jesus is prepared to go with Jairus, and he's prepared to stop for his daughter. The synagogue ruler would be someone well-bred, well-groomed, well-respected, well-heeled. The woman would just be the opposite, one who would cause others to wrinkle their noses and curl up their lips. She is someone who is at the mercy of those who make the rules and the money. She suffers from a disease that others judge to be degrading, that makes her life a misery. You can imagine that to be so true. Jewish laws concerning impurity sought to prevent ordinary people from infringing the realm of God's holiness. And of course we see in this instant and other instances like this that Jesus has come to break down these barriers that are so against the love of God for his people. Then Jairus hears that his daughter's died. Well, that brings up other problems. Jewish people were encouraged not to touch dead bodies. And yet the daughter, his love, has died. But does Jesus, being a Jew through and through, stop to consider the fact that now he should stop going to this young girl? No. Here we have another of those laws that come up that reflect on this passage. Whoever touches the dead body of a person shall be unclean for 7 days. He shall cleanse himself with water on the 3rd day, and on the 7th day and so be clean. But if he does not cleanse himself on the 3rd day and on the 7th day, he will not be unclean. Whoever touches a dead person, the body of anyone who has died, and does not cleanse himself, defiles the tabernacle of the Lord, and that person shall be cut off from evil. And that even relates to the body, the father, the close family of the person who's died, who will be expected to get that person ready for burial, which would mean generally undressing them, washing them, and preparing them with ointments and all the rest of it for them to be buried. But of course, you see, Jesus, through his actions, doesn't take any notice of these Jewish rules that have been misinterpreted over the years. Jesus does not distinguish between the rich and the poor, or those who've got power and those who have none, or those who are ritually unclean. This is Jesus' mission, to change the thought processes of those who've misinterpreted God's holy laws for years. Jesus doesn't worry about any of that sort of thing about becoming unclean, does he? Because he breaks through the barrier and brings holiness to people in need. Jesus went up to lepers and held them and showed that lepers and other people were never unclean in God's eyes, but in need of his love. I mean, that raises a sort of question towards our understanding of who Jesus is. Do you ever feel disadvantaged in your relationship with Jesus because you're not at the top end of the social scale? You've got no real power. You've got no real authority in society. Do you feel jealous of others who belongs to God's people, who've got power and money and authority? Well, you shouldn't do, because that doesn't judge our status before God. God doesn't look at us through the eyes of our bank balances or social standing, or whether we're clean or unclean in these ancient laws. He's concerned with us personally and whether we have a heart to recognise who he truly is. The other interesting thing about this is, in this lovely story, why does Jesus call this woman out? His power's been drained and he stops in his track. He knows, or must have known, that the power has gone to heal a woman with menstrual problems. He would have known that she would have been hiding from society because there was a danger of everybody drawing back from her. That's a recognition, I believe, that she needs to know that she's healed. Jesus speaks to her as a daughter of the kingdom. He calls her out and addresses her, my daughter, my daughter. He wants her to take her full position in front of these people, most certainly who would have known about her. You can't live in one of the villages around Lake Galilee without being known as a woman especially that was unclean. It would have been noticed that she hadn't gone to the synagogue. It would have been noticed that she would be joining in the normal social events of the communities of that time. And so Jesus wants to call her out of our embarrassment, not so for her to slip away and stay away from people. But he wants to draw her back into the community. Why? Because she's healed and he's cared for her. She needs to step out and be able to say boldly, I am no longer unclean. Jesus has healed me. My faith has played its part. I'm not going to let those physicians keep on taking my money. She needs to be recognised for who she is, a child of God. And Jesus restores this daughter of Israel in that way. And so Jesus marches on. That situation being dealt with, he's not worried that this young girl has died because he's decided that she's only sleeping. Everybody else wants to stop Jesus coming to her now. Don't bother the teacher. Well, that says a lot, doesn't it? These associates and perhaps family of Jairus only see Jesus as a teacher. They don't see him as the saviour of the world, the one who can bring healing into people's lives. I expect Jairus was a bit miffed to think that if Jesus hadn't stopped to deal with this woman, although it wouldn't have been that long, that Jesus might have got there before his daughter died. But Jesus says to him, have faith, let's go, take me to your daughter. And so they march on, and as they get to the home of Jairus, Jesus stops the crowd from coming anywhere near. It's just a few of the disciples, the inner circle, Jairus and the mother, I suspect. Don't be afraid, he tells them on the way. Just keep believing. And he goes straight up to the child, brushing away the fact that he's no longer leading. Nobody can raise people from the dead, can they? But Jesus ignores that fact and comes straight into the girl's bedroom and says, wake up, little girl. Wake up. You're only asleep. You're only asleep. And this is what he says to the family. And we know he goes on to say to the family, don't tell anybody about this. Your daughter was just asleep. Give her some food. You know, why? Because this is not the time to enlighten people about the fact that Jesus is the resurrection and the life. This is, you know, perhaps as much as a year before he's going to go towards Jerusalem. The people don't know sufficiently enough about Jesus at the moment to catch on to this point about he's come to raise people from the dead. He will be raised from the dead. The people of Galilee can't cope with the fact that he is the resurrection and the life just at this moment. It will change when he gets near to Jerusalem and he hears about Lazarus and he knows he's going to the cross and will be raised again. That will all change. So it's not the time for this to be taught and recognised. I think that's the explanation why he just wants to keep it quiet. The parents could say, oh, it's all right, she wasn't dead. The teacher said she was just asleep. And I suspect they would just accept that. But probably the mother knew that the child was dead. But the others might not just have come to that sense. So he didn't say to the mourners he was going to raise her from death, as he said to the crowd who followed him to the grave to Lazarus. He doesn't want that to be an issue. 2 reasons, really. The timing was not right for the miracle resurrection to be broadcast around at that time. And secondly, there was a danger if that had become the focus of his ministry, he would only have been seen as a miracle healer rather than the true Son of God. There's some other things we need to recognise. Jesus, these 2 healings, in fact, show that it's faith in Christ that is the key to this. The synagogue official and the woman do not come to faith after they are healed. They come to Jesus because they had faith that he could heal them. Faith opens the door to seeing the power of Jesus' saving mission, his saving act. That's what's going on here. Faith opens the door. Faith transfers the divine power to those who are utterly powerless. Your faith has healed you, he says to them. Faith, can be imperfect. It needn't be bold. It can be stuttering. We don't have to be brave. It can be laced with fear and trepidation. But it's faith that counts, and directed and believed in Jesus can bring healing, this miracle tells us. The other thing we see is that faith perhaps needs to be persistent of overcoming obstacles. We can see this particularly in a woman as she battles through her condition, battles through the crowds where she knew she wouldn't be welcome if she was identified for who she is. Persistence on behalf of Jairus, because he knew those who were in authority over him would not be pleased that he was going to Jesus for healing. Faith needs to step out of the shadows on occasions and become persistent and to seek God's healing in our lives. And faith needs to be embodied in action. Jairus just couldn't think, well, Jesus is coming. Perhaps he had come to me. No, he had to go up to Jesus. The woman couldn't just watch Jesus walk by. She needed to take action. And they both kneel before Jesus and either ask or pray to be healed. And that still counts today. These women don't see Jesus as a prophet, as a teacher. They see him as their saviour. And that's what we still need to do today. I like this quote from Liz Pacey. Jairus' daughter and the unnamed woman will remember this day for the rest of their lives. Both have been touched by a power beyond anything they could have imagined. And these events bring hope to us that however unsolvable our problems seem, Jesus can bring his touch to us in an unbelievable way. So I love this miracle. I think it can teach us so much about faith. Don't you?